Major John Dorin. I'm currently signed with the Joint Force Headquarters. Along with me, I brought First Class Roderic Haworth, currently signed to Bravo Company, 2nd 135th Infantry. First, I'd like to thank the 34th ID Association for giving us the opportunity to kind of talk about our deployment in 2005 and 2006 to Afghanistan. Mission was to support the Afghan National Army as part of the embedded training team, simply known as the ETTs. Kind of the agenda.
Hey,
so
John, real quick, in terms of all the ETTs we did, where were you in terms of, that's what I thought.
We were before they put the omelet.
Right.
That was big stuff.
Right. Okay, so you were the first ETT that we sent from Minnesota. Okay.
Yes, sir. The agenda is really, today's presentation is kind of, will describe the journey from when we left Minnesota and all the stops we had with the Afghan National Army. This agenda will kind of cover all that. Kind of country overview. I won't go into the history of the Afghanistan. I think many of you know the history leading up to where we are today. Just the kind of simple facts. The country is roughly the size of Texas. The big thing is the capital in Kabul here. They have 34 provinces. For example, Kandahar. The area we were in was the province of Zabul. And within the country, there's 364 districts. So the district that Sergeant Haworth was in is down in Shinkay district, and I was down in Navahar district. Population-wise, as of today, is roughly around 31 million. So the population has increased in the last 10 years. Biggest to note is the religion. The predominant religion in Afghanistan was 84% Sunni and then about 50% Shia. But the biggest thing we learned was that really didn't become the biggest factor. What was more of a factor was the tribal areas that they actually were from. So when you talk to different groups, it wasn't that he's a Shia or he's a Sunni. It was I'm a Pashtun or he's a Tajik or so forth. That really became the biggest issue or challenges that we dealt with. The official language, if you ask the Afghanis over there, they'll say it's Pashtun, but the actual language in Afghanistan was Dari. And so the area we were in was heavily Pashtun influenced, so they predominantly spoke Pashtun. The issue we had was most of our soldiers came from the northern area, which is predominantly Dari. So when we brought them south, we had a lot of challenges having our Afghan soldiers talking to local civilians. That was kind of a challenge because they couldn't really understand each other. So that's why our interpreters really came in handy, because I had one that could speak Dari and Pashtun. So he had to kind of talk in both languages back and forth to our soldiers and to the civilians. Kind of some of the people of Afghanistan. Really, if you look at the country, the ethnic population, roughly 40% was Pashtun. Why that was important was that the president of Afghanistan was Pashtun. All the major areas, the Kabul and Kandahar, the biggest mass population was predominantly Pashtun. Where you saw the diverse areas was in the central and the Hindu Kush was predominantly Hazaras, and they were that was an area where they considered as the lowest level of their societal level, and that was one of the challenges going forward. We also had to deal with that because we had all the Pashtuns, we had Tajiks, Uzbeks, and then Hazaras, and even in the army, that came into play as we were moving along. One thing really, in the areas we went to, because it's such a poor country, it was literally about survival for the folks that were out in the rural towns and villages. Where when you went into Kabul and Kandahar, there was a lot more money, there was a lot more jobs, opportunities. Where we were, you can see that. Some of the enemy threat I thought was kind of interesting. Predominantly, the folks that we dealt with was the ACM, the anti-coalition militia, and the Taliban. As we're going along, one of the unique groups that we started trickling in was the Chechens. They were starting to filter into the country, and they started moving into down the Zabul and the Ruzgan areas. What ended up happening was after 9/11, the Taliban basically was disbanded. But the issue was they started forming their own independent groups, and at the time, the chain of command that they had, it kind of all broke. And so they were kind of operating independently in Afghanistan, but the problem was their chain of command was really in Pakistan. And it was really in 2005, no, correction, 2006. There was an individual by the name of Dadullah Lang, who basically considered himself the de facto Taliban commander, the senior commander in Afghanistan. And one of the main things he did was he took all those independent factions down in the south and kind of tried to bring them all together under his umbrella. And one thing to highlight, when we got there, and you'll see on the next slide, where the hot area when we got there was starting to migrate to the south. And the areas that was really directly affected was in Zabul province and Uruzgan, and then started to filter down to Kandahar. Why that was significant was the Taliban started to reform itself, and they were starting to get pushed more of the fighters from Pakistan up to Afghanistan. One of the key areas was in Uruzgan and down to Kandahar. The problem was Zabul lied right in between the two locations, so we were kind of like the highway to get to both those locations. Really, our mission, the ATT mission in Afghanistan, was to mentor the ANA in the leadership, planning, assessing, supporting, and execution of operations. In addition to training and mentoring the ANAs, the ETT provided access to combat enablers such as close air support, fires, medevac, and quick reaction. The close air support, yes. Medical evacuation, yes, we could call for medevac quickly. And the QRF really came from the 173rd Airborne Brigade that was down in Kandahar. So they were our QRF in case we needed help. The ANA, basically, the ANA personnel received mentoring and training in the field. That was a whole life. Our job was to take them, to teach, coach, and mentor, so ultimately that they can do independent operations. If they got to that level, then we did what we were supposed to do. So Minnesota, what pushed out of Minnesota was 16 personnel, is what we left. And the requirement in order to be on this team is either you have to be infantry qualified as an officer or NCO, RTI instructor qualified if you met that requirement, or if you were a Ranger qualified. So if you met one of the three requirements, then you could be placed on this team. So predominantly, if you look at this, a big influence with the 34th ID, from 2 to 135 infantry, and back then 2 to 136 infantry had a bulk of the soldiers. We also had to draw from Joint Force Headquarters, and we also drew from 34th Infantry Division. And lastly, we also had to pull a couple individuals from 175th RTI, rounded out the team. The rank structure you saw, this was very close to what the guidance we received from National Guard Bureau. They said you will have 105, you'll have 404s, 2 captains, and that's going on the line. So, when we got down to Fort Hood, was our low platform. When we got down there, we were plussed up with 3 individual personnel. So we kept initially all our 16, and then we drew 3 NCOs from Wyoming, Nebraska, and Missouri that we were to receive a mobile station and then go for it downrange. Post-mob, really to highlight it, post-mob tasks is no different than any other mob station that, whether you're going to Afghanistan or Iraq. The issue was that we had was that the deployment was not really tailored to go into Afghanistan. It was really tailored to go into Iraq. And so they would provide a block of instruction, and then they would catch themselves to say, when you go into Iraq, this is what you're going to see. So what ended up happening was we tried to get the best amount of TTPs we could on just the general tasks to deal with, like mines, IEDs, and so forth. A lot of TTPs that even the TTPs we received in Fort Hood, so they have folks come in and talk a little bit about what was happening, but when we got in the theater, it was, as you know, like most other deployments, it was complete opposite. One was they said is don't talk to the soldiers. They talk to interpreters, talk to soldiers, and that was completely opposite. Another one was don't talk with dealing with females and males. We didn't really talk with. They were saying you get permission to talk from the head of the household to talk to females. That was not the case. We physically never talked to any females. Most of the cases when females were near us, that males would always desegregate them, kind of push them somewhere else and so forth. So that was one of the TTPs that said if you do need to talk to females, talk to the interpreter, talk to the male, and then maybe talk with them. That was not the case.
The training was set up, as Major Dorin said, mainly for Iraq, whereas we were not doing a main force normal operation. We were doing something that they hadn't really done before. So they didn't really know, and even if they would have known we were doing that, I don't know if they would have been able to actually had a program for us. So we took what they had and then, worked on TTPs and things like that we learned from guys who'd been there before to develop our plan.
And when you got into the bigger populations like Kabul, they didn't wear, the females did not wear burqas. They were out in the open. A lot of times they wore the Western clothing. So I think the folks that were talking to us was in that area where they could talk to females and not in the open. It was not an issue. The problem is when you got into smaller towns and villages, that was not acceptable. The reason I put this there, movement theater, it just seemed like it was a kind of a never-ending trip to get over actually into Afghanistan. We left Dallas, had to stop New York to go to Ireland, and then somehow we had to stop in Turkey for a few hours, and then got to Kyrgyzstan, and then highlight Kyrgyzstan. That was the actual gateway to get into Afghanistan. Meaning all units had to process in and out of there, and then finally we landed in Kabul, which started our journey. The Kandak we fell under is called 36 Kandak. A couple things I want to highlight. So our ETT group, which was roughly 183 folks, it was a mixture of USAR and the National Guard. When we got to Fort Hood, they slammed all of us together and told us 183 packs will go over to Afghanistan and be ETTs. What was unique about the 36 Kandak was our group was the very first group in the ANA history that, as ETTs, we actually started at basic training, meaning we actually received the folks coming off the streets in civilian clothes, and we actually watched them all the way from basic training and AIT. What happened before us was that the ETTs, once they got done with AIT, they would meet their Afghans, they would pick them up, and then they would go downrange. And I think by having this, what it did was it allowed us to build that trust and bond at a much earlier time. We knew most of the leadership before we went downrange, and I think that helped us. But the Kandak battalion, this is how they were lined up. It was a typical light infantry battalion was how they were lined up. 3 platoons, 3 companies, with the battalion headquarters, roughly around 800 packs. So basically, how they modeled the ANA was off of a U.S. light infantry battalion. The way that they broke down the ETTs, they took usually a captain and an NCO and 2 packs. We'll go take an infantry company and we'll go downrange. Wherever they went, you went, lived, ate, and slept, and trained with them from start to finish. Usually the field grades level, the majors, the lieutenant colonels, what they would do with them is they would take that group and put them with the battalion or the Kandak headquarters and work with their staff, from the commander all the way down to S1 to 6. Basic training, AA basic training, was modeled right after the U.S. basic training. 6 weeks of basic and then 6 weeks of AIT. It's kind of the same concept. What they ended up doing was they actually brought the drill sergeants from the U.S. when they were trying to get this thing up and running. So they brought drill sergeants in to work with the Afghan NCOs who ran basic training. And the actual basic training site is in Kabul, at the Kabul Military Training Center. And what was interesting was, so myself and Sergeant Haworth, when we went in and were supposed to link up with our first company, they did it like in basic training. They came in civilian clothes, they sat there, drill sergeants came, yelled at them, and welcomed them. And then day 2, they all lined up to the SIF, got all the uniforms, all the equipment. And then day 3 is when they found out what unit that they were assigned, what company they were assigned. So really it followed the model of what we do in basic training. Really the focus for basic training at the individual level, it was really the focus was customs and courtesies. They put a lot of time into marching because they have a lot of pride in the marching, how they look and so forth. But the real focus was just really the 40 and 9 tasks. They really drilled them hard there. Also the weapons. The weapons familiarization, especially the AK-47, is what they predominantly worked on. We had an opportunity, myself and Sergeant Haworth, I actually got to see them doing the Army physical fitness test. It was very interesting, but they did it push-ups, sit-ups, and then they did the 2-mile run. Really the collective task, they did really the one squad react to contact, and they would do a blank fire, which don't have any blanks, but just went through the drills, and then they'd have a live fire. So we had a chance to observe that.
With the individual customs and courtesies, Major Dorin was saying, a challenge, as he mentioned earlier, was the cultural differences and the tribal differences, was getting them to understand that, yes, you're from here, you're from this town, this village, but under this flag, you're all the same. You know, getting them to understand that you're where you're from and you should have pride in that, but when we go to war, when we go forward, we are one army. And you know, we're part of this just like you guys are.
Was their basic training rigorous, or what's the word I'm looking for? Did it indoctrinate them enough to actually be able to set aside those tribal rivalries, tribal differences, or social hierarchical differences, so that a squad leader or an NCO from, you know, this tribe, Pashtun or Uzbek, you know, versus the Ashiri, or what's the other one? Hazar. You know, did basic training was it structured enough to be able to overcome that?
I don't think so. I think that was our challenge. Was to take the NCOs aside at the end of the training, and then also talk with the soldiers to say, you know, we need to come together on this, and everyone needs to understand. It's like, you know, Major Dorin's from Wisconsin, I'm from Minnesota, but we all wear the same flag. We all say U.S. Army, and just getting them to understand that concept was like mind blowing to them. And that, I think, is one of the things that made us such a good unit, was they could put all that stuff aside and they could write their letters home and stuff. But when we left the gate, you know, everyone had the same mindset. That was a big victory for us.
Basically, the challenge we had was we were observers. The ETTs and the basic training, we had to sit there and observe what was going on. Meaning, we couldn't jump in or do on-the-spot corrections. What we ended up having to do is taking notes. So when they're doing a task, a simple IMT, and they're completely just following around and stuff, meaning we couldn't stop and say, hey, no, let's do the task over again. We had to take notes, and then later on, we would get with the platoon leaders and platoon sergeants, and then kind of go over the task. And they had an FM 7-8 in a Dari Pashtu, and we would actually go there and talk with them individually on those tasks.
How many were literate?
The NCOs and officers were, that was how you became an NCO or an officer. You had to be able to read.
So there was not a high representation of the Hazara population on that?
Actually, I don't recall. Because there were no Hazara. We're all just Afghans. So we had to keep telling them, you're not a Pashtun, you're just we're all Afghans.
How you know Hazaras? Because they had the Asian, the facial features. So you know, so people thought I was from Hazara when I came into the formation.
He said, no, I'm from Wisconsin. Like, where's Wisconsin? It's my time. It's east of China.
The reason I put ANA pay was that basic training was the first time we started doing the pay process and kind of give you an idea of what they made per month. And why this becomes significant is, why this became significant was that, yes,
Valuable assets.
that was one issue, is that initially, like the battalion commander or Kandak commander never knew what the interpreters got paid. We never told them, and they didn't tell them. Somehow they found out, and we were very upset that the interpreters were getting paid more than almost the general. But it wasn't going to change anything. They were just upset with the pay difference between the Army and anything else. Also later on, we also had to be careful was that Afghan leadership, especially payday, for some reason the company leadership would receive the pay. And then they would say, we'll get the money to each soldier. And we caught that one. That was a kind of an issue that the previous ETTs had. So when they did payday, we were actually there watching them give the $70 to the private, and we were actually sitting there watching. What happened after, we don't know, but Sergeant Haworth and I would always be there on payday to make sure the soldiers got paid. AIT. So once we got done with the Kabul Military Training Center, then we had to jump over to a place called Polocharki, which is about 5 miles on the road, but it's a complete different training area. Roughly another 6 weeks, we kind of watched them. Now it's more on the, if you look at AIT, it's more geared towards the infantry specific, I would say that squad. They try to get the platoon level, but that was not going to happen. And the couple things I thought was interesting was the one areas that they really did a lot of work was in prep for combat. They did a lot. Establish, operate, checkpoint. What I thought was interesting, they actually have a task that says enter and clear a cave. I thought that was interesting. That was one of the actual tasks that they had to train on.
Different than enter and clear a building or
Correct.
clear a room.
Yeah.
Correct.
In America, we practice CQB on knees. You know, that's your door frame. Well, in Afghanistan, you're going down 3 stairs. The door is this tall and it's that wide. So enter, clear a cave for them is just like enter. It's you know, be my size, even be his size, with all your stuff on it. Try to get him to do that. That's a task.
But we
so
did.
doing that was very important.
But we did train them to enter, clear a room and building. The highlight on AIT really is that in order to complete the AIT portion, all platoons had to go through a field training exercise, and the Army that validated them was the Canadians. So towards the end, the last 2 weeks, or correction, last week, every platoon was scheduled a time and location and all the key tasks, and every platoon had to go with the Canadians to go through the ZTX. Once they got to the task, they would validate each platoon. In order to get out of AIT and get them ready to go down range, the Canadians would have to come back to the Kandak to say the following platoons are validated from company 1, 2, and 3. And ultimately, sometimes what happens is some platoons may get delayed because they can't quite finish all the tasks and they're not validated. What happens is that the whole Kandak gets held. So luckily for our 36 Kandak, all platoons made their timeline, and then they continue on. So it brings it to ANA graduation. what had happened was after they received the validation, what they do is they make this a big, I mean, their graduation is very important to them. As part of the graduation, they also do kind of swearing in to the Army. Kind of picture to your right. So they all have the AKs on the table. They also have a copy of the Quran on the table, and then they all swear into the Army.
They put their hand on the Quran, which is on the flag, and that's their oath.
So once they got done, as ETTs, we had to give them a 30-day block leave. Concern for us was it's right before to take the movement downrange, and it was something that Ministry of Defense, we couldn't reduce the number of days. It's you got to give them 30 days and then give them a report date and time to come back. The thing that was interesting about this is all the other Kandaks previous to us, they had what, a 30 to 40% AWOL rate. They would lose almost 2 companies worth of soldiers not come back from their leave. What's good about the 36 Kandak was that when they came back after 30 days, 94% of the soldiers actually returned back to that Kandak. And that 6% that didn't show up, they showed up later on downrange and linked back up with the companies. So we had a really low AWOL rate initially.
Why do you think that is?
They had a very strong, they had one of the strongest battalion commanders of any Kandaks that were out there. Their leadership was extremely strong. From the battalion commander to battalion CSM to the company commanders and their first sergeants was unique was that their leadership was very soldier focused, and a lot of the soldiers in the leadership actually trusted them and followed them. So I think that had to do a lot with it, because they're really the ETTs. There's nothing we could do. Only thing we could hold above them is that we hold our ANA pay for next month. So that was one of the incentives also to come back, was to get paid. Just do a quick lay down. The 19 that went downrange, what we thought when we got in the country, what they told us was that we were all going to the same location. 19 packs, we were all going to the same location. And we thought we're all coming down the Shinkick. It was not till, it was right before we got, right after we got in the theater, is when the colonel told us, hey, here's our assignments. This is where the 36 Kandaks is going to get spread out. Oh, by the way, many of you in the 19 are going elsewhere from us. So for example, the way it's laid out is that the northern sector was given to the Germans, but we had to send 2 captain and NCO up to Mazar Sharif to help that as ETTs up north. They were short. We had to send 5 packs over to coast with their shortage of ETTs with 82nd Airborne. So Major John O'Rillan, we had to give him 4 packs, and he went over there. So Sergeant Haworth and our team chief, the Lieutenant Colonel, he had 4 packs in Shinkick. But from there, we also had to send 1 pack to Shamozai with the 1 platoon out of 173rd Airborne was there. But they also had a platoon of ANA there. So that 1 individual had to go and observe them. And then myself and 1 NCO, we went to Navahar with 1 company. And then this was probably one of the best moves we did, is we took 1 rep and we embedded them into the 2nd and 503rd PIR. We actually took one of our guys and embedded him into the battalion staff to kind of as the link between the ANA from the ETTs to the U.S. forces, and that really paid huge dividends. And then we sent 2 folks down as ETTs down to Kandahar, and then south was really ran by the 173rd Airborne. And then we sent, at the last minute, we had to send 2 individuals to Helmand. That's where, this was a new mission that was happening. They were trying to establish an outpost in Helmand. And so the 173rd kicked out the Lurstee to establish an outpost on the helmet. And so at the last minute, one A&A company was moved to the helmet to support that. And then was when we were there, they had given the West, RC West, to Italians. So really where the U.S. Battle space they owned was down in the south, and then the east they still owned. So they had given up the north and west to cope the ISAF countries. This is basically what the ETT's individual equipment. Looking at the shoot and communicate, we had a lot of, we had dual weapon. But really, our lifeline here was this right here. We also got the TACSAT radio, and that's really how they communicated over there. FM was really was unusable because of the terrain that we had to fight. So FM really was not. We couldn't really use that.
And it was unsecure. So the 117 was a huge force multiplier. And the emitter also, for missions, we could boost those things up. We can get boosters for those where you could go 100 kilometers with that thing. It was great.
So it's nice having a redundant. It was nice having a redundant communication package. But predominantly we used what I ended up using was the emitter because it was lightweight, and I just had the TACSAT antenna with me, and it worked great. ETT vehicles. When we first got in the country, we did not have the 1114s. So we initially had to move around in the Ford Ranger NTV vehicles, and we weren't sure all the way up to the end whether we were going to take NTVs downrange, because a lot of ETTs went downrange with NTVs. They didn't have any 1114s at the time. When we got there, they were starting to receive them and starting to issue them out to the ETTs. One good thing, again, redundant communications in this thing. It was nice to really have this Blue Force tracker. It worked, and that was really the lifeline for us when we were on the road. And then also, we had a 240 up on a turret, but the way the ETTs are set up, we didn't have a third person, so a lot of times we still mount the weapon, and in certain areas I would jump up in the turret. Really to highlight here, the common weapon for the A&A was their AK-47, which is really nice. One of our soldiers in each company got the Dragunov sniper rifle, which was nice to have. And then also, we had the PK machine gun, was really helpful, and an RPG. And the radio communication, the FM, was the old PRC 77. That's what they were given. But rather than using that, they would always use the icons. Why? Because Taliban was talking with them, they were talking with them, so it was just always the primary method of communication for the A&A was to use the icons. When we went on missions, we made them use the PRC 77s.
The ICOMs, they would always monitor to hear what the bad guys were doing. Then the Terps, like our Terp, I rode the gun, Colonel drove, our Terp sat right behind the Colonel, and he would relay any information he was hearing over the ICOMs to us. So he had the A&A in one here, and he had the Taliban in the other here. Just relayed constantly, relayed back and forth what was going on.
And that's why I paid him $500 a month.
Yes.
Right.
I won't tell you what the interpreters in Iraq got.
Vehicles, the A&Es, they issued them, the Ministry of Defense issued out. These were the new NTVs, and then these were also new, and then there's different variants. In our company, they issued us 4 pickup trucks, and they were all the 2 doors. Which is good because you can fit more folks back there. They could fit a full squad
with their gear.
Yes. Another thing was to note for the ETTs, every month I had to fly to Kandahar, and I would have to draw out $10,000 US. And what that money was for is I had to pay for all the fuel, repair parts, and any repairs that had to be done on the vehicles.
Yeah, so like food and pay agents, we had those, and every team that was displaced had a food agent.
And then what we didn't use, we still had to go back that month. If I didn't expend it all, you still got to turn it in and redraw the 10,000 and start all over again. This was, for us, this was really the key for us, painting vehicles, the motorcycles. The reason why they were, I think, better, because the way that the terrain was very difficult, but the motorcycles are extremely fast and they could get to whoever we need to chase down. So what was interesting was in Zabul province, the governor outlawed all motorcycles. So, because Taliban rode on motorcycles, so he put a law out there saying no motorcycles allowed, except for the Afghan National Police and for the ANA. That was it. So if we're rolling on a patrol and all of a sudden we see some guy going around the desert in a motorcycle, we could actually stop and apprehend that motorcycle. Up to the point where that individual, if they could prove that they had purchased or owned that motorcycle, then they would give that motorcycle back to the individual and tell them don't ever ride that motorcycle again. What ended up happening was, the majority of the folks that the Afghan National Police stopped, well, no one carries their proof of ownership on them, so they just grab the motorcycle. So our compound all of a sudden was a holding area for motorcycles. So right before we left, the Afghan National Army actually were issued the new motorcycles. They were actually 2 of them. And so as TTPs, as ETTs were and ANAs were starting the mission early on, motorcycle was not in their factor of the movement. It would just pick up trucks or dismount it. But more and more ANAs started using motorcycles and they started to issue those out to the ANAs. The post that I was on Navahar. Kind of from the exterior, kind of running through this. It basically was a mud compound, about a 20-foot high wall, 4 towers, and while we were there, and you probably can't see it, but these right here, we basically had to rebuild all those towers up there for the Afghan soldiers. Is that?
It's plugged in already.
It doesn't look like this might be wrong. This is not.
I can turn it on.
Mouse fails to turn on and off.
It's plugged it in, I don't turn stuff on.
Where we had this right here, the compound was actually the district headquarters for our district chief. Inside there, he also had roughly 30 Afghan National Police that lived in the compound. So when we got there, so I had myself, my NCO, and I also made the interpreter. He basically, I took all 3 of us, we lived in one area. I made sure that the interpreter was safe. And also, was not really directed, but I also brought in the Afghan company commander. I also brought in my compound and had him sleep there. And also he brought a Afghan squad come in there. And they basically did was a security for the compound for us. This really was just a storage area, and then this was the front gate. When we got there was no running water. Electricity initially ran through a 5 kilowatt generator, so they kept on burning those out. So finally they delivered us a 25 kilowatt generator. Basically, we had to go through this whole compound and we had to rewire ourselves all electricity. So for heat, we just got, it was a wood burning stove behind our room, and then we would pay to get the wood delivered to us. Really for washing our clothes, there was a stream that ran in the middle of the compound. We just go down and wash our clothes. And then finally, to get rid of the garbage and trash and all that, I'm going to show you it's quite easy on this one. Over right here was a big burn pit. You just kind of throw everything in there and burn it. So is the training right here, and then this was the kind of the screen that ran in the middle of our compound. Really, lunch and dinner was nice. We started really eating the MREs, and after about a month, that just got old. So we really, the A&A was nice enough. They ended up feeding us lunch and dinner. It was actually really good. And so part of the deal was if we helped them buy, get them the food, then they would feed us, and that worked out really good.
Bob Sweeney was located about 75 kilometers south of Kalat. You had to go through a very, very large, dangerous mountain range called the Dow Pass to get to it. There's certain points where you are, if you've seen the movie Restrepo, when they're fighting like this, there were parts of it that were so steep and so jagged that I would have to unhitch the gun and get down into the turret to see up into it because you couldn't get the gun to elevate that high. You get there, and then it was approximately 1 mile of Pesco's, and I'm always forgetting if it's diameter or circumference. One's this way, one's
Circumference.
circumference. There we go. We held our ATT team there in one V hut. Eventually, we had 3. We got people that got plus up at the end. 2 A&A companies plus their headquarters. An entire company from 173rd. We had 2 ODAs. We had 1 operating there at a time, and then they would switch out. But we had a full chow hall, gym, mechanic shop, call center, and we'd get Line 3 aircraft on the helicopter landing zone. It was located in a town called Shinke. It was like right in the middle. So you'd come into the Dob, and it was one half was the north part. Then there was Sweeney, and then the southern part was on the other end. So when we went to visit Major Dorin at Nabahar, we'd go from the north, Shambalzai and Dawarzigi would go from the south. But then we would do presence patrols in both parts, just to let them know we were there and take care of anything that we could help out with. Schools, funds, helping the AAP.
So when we arrived in Nabahar, some of the training requirements, the guidance I got was, you got 30 days, you got 1 squad from the 173rd, they're going to stay with you for 30 days. The 2 things you got to do is use them to help train the Afghan soldiers. And second is that in 30 days you got to do your RIP, get them out of there, and you guys stay there. So then the 30 days, that was my tasking when I got there. What basically we did was, I was saying earlier in basic and IT, we really didn't have a lot of input on the training that was happening. So when we got there with the U.S. squad, the platoon sergeant was there, and we kind of redeveloped the training plan, and we started basically from individual to team to squad all over again in 30 days. We took them all, we did 2 days. So it was really a red cycle. So in the morning we train, then we give them a short break, early afternoon, and we go train back again in the evening. So 2 days for 30 days we did. This is from training and validation. So this came from the 173rd commander. In the southern portion that he owns, he kind of put some guidance out to say, by January 2006, when you guys leave, this is some training and validation requirements you must get done with your ETT, A&A before you leave. So for example, in Phase 0, which is within the first 30 days, there was 29 BCT or basic training tasks we had to complete. There was 2 squad tasks we had to complete. And in between the 30 days, I thought it was critical. We also had 30 Afghan National Police sitting on the compound. And what we did early on was to integrate them into our training. And so they understood some of the basic fundamental tasks. 30 days came and ripped out, so the 173rd left and we stayed. And then that started the Phase 1 training cycle, which now focused at the squad level. So in Phase 1, from July to August, we had 7 individual critical tasks we had to do, 11 squad tasks, 2 platoon, and 3 leader tasks. all driving towards to get to the election. So we were one of the election sites during the parliamentary and the provincial elections. Navajo was one of the election sites. So these tasks were critical in support of the election that was coming up, that we were responsible for. Once election got done, we moved into kind of the phase 2, was at the platoon level. And there was 9 platoon tasks, and then also the phase 3 was platoon level. Ultimately, they would try to get us to the company level, but it was impossible because of the 3 platoons I had. When we got to Navajo, the Canada commander actually took one of our platoons and pulled him down with him down at the Canada to be his PSD. So really, after knowing that, the 173rd commander just said, okay, just drive on, just get to platoon level, but you still got to meet the end state, which is by January, your A&A company they need to be able to conduct independent operations without really ETT help. So looking at the A&A operations, really, the way we ended up doing it was for this amount of training, any task we did, we would train the task. In the afternoon, it was a prep for combat time, they'd eat, and then at about 2200 at night, we'd SP. And then usually, if it's a cordon and search, by first light, we're near the village, and they would execute that task. So mornings were always kind of focusing on the task we wanted to train, and then the following day is when we would execute that specific task. So some of the things we did mostly this amount of training. We always had at least a platoon level that came out with us, no less. And no more because I didn't have the vehicle assets to get more than one platoon. Plus, also had to help them secure the compound, the A&A compound, and there was a market that they also had to secure. So one platoon was kind of locked down in security in the back of the rear. Some of the things we did, TCP, elections, and then we did a lot of mounted presence patrols. We did quite a few of those.
It's a pretty heavy traffic there for your TCP.
It was election.
Our means a struggle, smuggling, right?
And well, animal-borne IEDs. Yep. And they put them in there and they pack them through.
So a lot of times when we did the mounted, most of our stuff was mounted because we were at about 7,000 feet altitude. So it was, once we got in the mountains, it was very, very slow. And the problem was we didn't have the resupply assets to get us more than 3 days up in the mountains. So we didn't do a whole lot of dismounted maneuver training. A lot of times the mounted, what we used to do was take the 2 A&A motorcycles, 2 AMP motorcycles, and they used to be out forward. And then the main body would come trail and then get to, like, if we're doing a blocking position or a cordon search or setting up an ambush, we'd always get them up front. So if they saw any Taliban on motorcycles, they could still go and chase them down. So that was our SOP. They were always, the motorcycles were always in front.
And by doing that, that also empowered them to take control of the mission and the operation. They put their face on it, and they had ownership over that.
What rank did they usually put on the motorcycles?
What?
What rank?
Sometimes there's NCOs.
E5s. They kind of had E5s and E7s. That was kind of it. And then they had a first sergeant and a sergeant major.
So here's what I was happy to report. Roughly around October, right after elections, the company commander actually came up to us and basically said, we want to plan our mission, we want to do the planning 72 hours out. All right, so he drew the plan up, he came back, I had to read it, because every day I had to report to the 173rd what the next 72 and work our ways down, what the mission was. And so about October is when he started doing the company level operation, but really was at the platoon and we were good to go. So by the time we left in January, the company was the only company in Zabo that was actually doing independent operations by themselves without really ETT assistance. And then lastly, resupply. Really, for us, is my main method was aerial. Every Thursday, drill would come. They would drop water and MREs off. And if they had any special requests, so once a week I knew a flight was coming in. I had 2 of these aerial drops. A lot of that was water and also humanitarian assistance equipment from the PRT. They would come and airdrop those things to us and we go chase them down. And then really the ground was really helpful. That Sergeant Haworth from Shinki, they would have to, over the ground, provide or transport the fuel, bulk fuel that I needed for the generators. That would all come over the road. The ANA food resupply would come over the road. This is the humanitarian assistance. Once winter started coming, roughly around the November time frame, as you probably have heard, the Taliban starting to slow down the fighting. Once winter comes, they kind of just quiet it down. They'll go back to where they came from. They just kind of bunk down for the winter. When spring comes up, they'll start their activities all over again in the spring and summer. So roughly around November, the guidance we got was kind of slow down your combat operations and then start looking at the humanitarian assistance operations. So, but throughout the whole process while we got there, the platoon sergeant I had from the 173rd, he was already well into a lot of the SERP projects. So by the time he left, I had to finish up the well constructions. He also had to, he was rebuilding that school next door to us. There was a medical clinic he was rebuilding. And so I basically helped him finish all the SERP projects. Also, preparing for winter. We had a lot of medicine, blankets, clothing that the PRTs, provincial reconstruction teams, airdropped or ground delivered to us to get them out to the villages, as many we could get out there. And then also helping out there was a lot of farmers near us. We had one day we came, the PRT dropped off all this equipment. We had village elders from key villages come in and pick up their equipment. And lastly, school supplies. We have one of our, I think it was our master sergeant down in Shinki. The local schools back here, which ship us boxes and boxes full of school supplies. And it was nice to be able to give those to the kids.
We did the same thing up at Shinki and the other box that we had too, because everyone had a school. So we would get up there as often as we could and spend time with those kids and teachers and things. And by the time we left Shinki, there was a girls' school. I was told it was burned down 2 weeks after we left. But when we left there, it was there.
And I think the greatest thing at the end of all this, I think the most fun I had was probably doing this. It's probably the most fun. Over the course of time, we were able to deliver bulk food to most of the villages, a lot of medicine, but we also brought in a lot of medical services like docs, veterinarians. We also have certain, like once a quarter they used to come in, and a lot of villages would come, civilians would come and take up full service, essential services. So that really paid off in the long run. Just kind of final thoughts. I kind of sat down the other day and just looking at, when it's all said and done, what were some highlights that you remember? I remember that the ANA, with how much time that the U.S. squad put into these Afghan soldiers, how much time we put into them. And I was asking Rod the other day, at the squad level, the proficiency was pretty darn close to it as a U.S. squad, which was pretty impressive. And I think, again, it was just the amount of time and effort in the meeting the standards or enforcing the standards, I think is why they got there. Another thing was the A&E, and you can ask any of the ETTs, they did a really good job on protecting the ETTs. What I mean by that was, any time that I would walk in from our compound, there's a market that was just like a block away, and I would take my interpreter and I would walk from the compound to the market, and all of a sudden, I see like 4 A&A soldiers just come up to you. And it was, basically the directive was, if you see the American walking by himself with the interpreter, someone better cover down on him, which we really appreciated. The local civilians, they were really receptive on the A&E. When they started going in that district, when we started going to all those different villages, they really liked the A&E because they were respectful. A lot of times they would find out what they needed, what help or assistance they needed. Previous to us getting there, the problem was the Afghan National Police. They would go into villages and just take stuff. They need food, they need fuel, and they would just grab it and they would take off. So it wasn't really a lot of assistance by the ANP to local civilians, but the ANA. Over time, I think when we did joint patrols between the ANP and ANA, we got them with us, I think that really helped in the long run. And plus also we changed out some of the ANP key leadership. Were fired and brought new folks in. I thought this was a key. In all the missions that we did in the humanitarian assistance or combat operations, the thing I always tried to make was to move the operations that had an Afghan face to operations that were Afghan led. I thought that was really important. So I could have set everything up, and then at the last minute I could take an Afghan soldier and slide in front of what I was doing. But I thought it was more important that they're the ones who identified it, try to get the resources, and then they're the ones that executed that portion, or provided resources to the civilians. The ANA's resupply, when we got there, that whole system was completely broke. The resupplying of the ANA troops. So a lot of times that burden kind of fell on the ETTs to cover down on the shortage, such as they ran out of food and they wouldn't get food for weeks at a time. So a lot of times ETTs would have to step in and purchase food for them or get them fuel and so forth. The only thing that always came on time was the pay, because the ETTs always had to fly in monthly and pay every one of the soldiers. That I knew always would happen. Last question was, question people have asked is, do you think we made a difference in the end? I would say yes. And I think that's depicted by them able to conduct their own independent operations without American assistance. I thought that was big. And that was really across the whole Kandak. They were all able to do that. I think the local population, the civilians, when I left them, initially they were kind of always looking towards us for help and assistance. And towards the end, I wasn't around, and they would go to the company commander or his leadership or to say, hey, we want to discuss this, or we need help on this, and so forth. So I think when it's all said and done, the last month I was there, I was just an observer. And so I think when that question came up, I think absolutely. So, hope I didn't run too much longer.
John, did you face any of the, later in the Afghan theater, there was so much concern about green on blue, or Afghan on U.S. Did that cross your mind at all as you were seeing the soldiers with either Taliban infiltration within the ANA at that period of time when you were doing your ETT?
At that time, I think when we went down range, I'd say that really never crossed our minds.
We had an interpreter that we found out before we left KMTC was doubling. We hired him. And then later on, we found out through our senior interpreter that he was doubling us. So he was working closely.
So only green on green that we saw was actually during basic training. And one soldier stole another soldier's teapot. And actually it was actually in a morning breakfast period where the ANA shot another ANA and killed him.
We were running and we heard it.
But in no time that while we were there, the green on blue incident happened.
That was part of what Major Dorin was saying. Is one of the platoons in the Kandak, one of the companies in the Kandak, doesn't get certified by the Canadians, they stay. But when we got to Policharky, when they were doing AIT, they're set up to handle, like, let's just say 3,000 soldiers. Well, they were holding over entire battalions because these other organizations had passed. So what you get there is, okay, we can serve 3,000 people, but all of a sudden, now we have 3,800, and the next week, oh wow, now we have, we have 4,400 soldiers. So your breakfast is getting served at 11 in the morning, and your dinner is getting served at midnight. And they were getting very upset. So one guy had a chai pot, didn't have enough chai for a Kandak. Bad day for that.
I mean, I think I ended up having, I had 2 interpreters. One was extremely good. He was English taught, he went to formal school, knew all the languages from Dari, Pashto, Farsi.
Urdu, Russian, Arabic.
So having that individual with me really helped. Also, he was also key in the fact we would go into villages and he'd look at someone and he would tell me that individual's not Afghani. So he would quietly come to me and said, the gentlemen over there and there are not Afghan. And so we would, I told an Afghan commander, and I said, go and talk with these 2 individuals, pull them aside and talk.
Or if they had their beards cut flat across the bottom, that's something that, why would I notice that, That was a Taliban kind of indicator, if they had their beard cut flat. And not being Afghani is important because Taliban aren't Afghan. They're from everywhere else. They're not from there. Terps were incredibly important. And sometimes you had good ones and sometimes you didn't, but we really took care of those guys because at the end of the day, they are the only thing that's between you and an entire company of guys with AK-47s. So we really took care of those individuals very well because, it can be bad if you didn't do that. So, and they were great guys anyways.
If I had a slide that says biggest challenges, one thing that U.S. forces really was a shortfall was they didn't do a good job on identifying those that were on the BOLO list or folks that was on. They didn't do a very good job. Kandahar did a good job because they had the separate systems up and running, Kabul. But when we were downrange, we would capture someone, we run their name back to the headquarters, and it didn't pop up. So they would say, released individual. The very next day, I would sit in on an update, and then the S2 would brief that we are looking for this person in this town and this thing. Probably on 3 occasions, we had picked someone up, and because they hadn't caught it up on their system, and that was the biggest challenge we had. We didn't know.
Did you have internet access in your compound?
We did.
You did it.
Sweeney was big. Sweeney, we had an entire company there. We had a SatLink. We had the whole 9 yards. They had a computer lab, a little tiny one, but we had everything there. So we would bring them any intel that we had because we try to get out there as often as possible.
So really, only I could do is I could call directly to the battalion S2. In the 2nd, 503rd, I was always call them directly, and I would feed them all the aliases they have, who they, as much information I could give to them, and somehow just we could never get that part fixed.
Oh, excellent presentation.